welcome to Lab the Podcast. I am grateful and honored to share some time with author, editor, and founder of Image, one of America's leading literary journals, Gregory Wolfe. Gregory was also the founding director of Seattle Pacific's University MFA in Creative Writing program, which he led for over a dozen years. He's currently the editor of an indie nonprofit literary press, Slant Books. Wolfe's writing has appeared in numerous publications, including The Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, First Things, Commonweal, and America. His books, Beauty Will Save the World, Intruding Upon the Timeless, and The Operation of Grace, are a collection of works that have been so influential to so many of us. And he is married to novelist Suzanne Wolfe. They are parents of 4 grown children and live out west in the beautiful state of Washington. Gregory, thank you for making time for us. We're honored to get to share some time with you.
Well, I'm very happy to be here.
Well, I say it's an honor because you are a pioneer and you pioneered Image, which has been a gift to so many people in so many ways. And that work began a long time ago. So you have been in this space of beauty and goodness and truth, faith and culture, faith and art for a long time. What do you marvel at the most, maybe when you look back and you think all the way back to the founding of Image? What maybe do you marvel at the most in the journey that you have taken to get all the way to Slant Books today?
Well, I'd say there's sort of good news and there's bad news. And the good news is, you know, when you compare the atmosphere of the late 1980s in the terms of the larger kind of American cultural landscape, and also particularly of interest to me, the religious landscape, the church landscape, we've come a long way. There are a lot of resources now and activity and discussion in areas that really just weren't, they were kind of dead zones. And so I'm grateful that some of the pioneering work that I was blessed to be able to do, but with others, many others, I immediately want to add that, to try to get the conversation between art and faith going. That's my simplest way of kind of reducing it to its essentials: art speaking to faith, faith speaking to art. That's been always my passion. There are now journals and magazines and organizations and conferences that didn't exist back then. The bad news side of it is that we're still fighting some of the same battles we fought back then, because there are deep-seated issues that inhabit our religious culture, just our national culture, about issues to do with beauty, to do with art, its value, its meaning. So in some ways, I get moments of just joy and delight that there's so much happening now. And then other times I get a little ornery, a little grumpy. Why are we still fighting some of these battles? But it's been a beautiful journey, and I still feels like it's not time yet for me to step back and look back. But I guess the hair's turning pretty white at this point. So some people like you're going to force me to have to look retrospectively at where I've come.
Yeah. Well, I mean, pretty cool to be able to say you and others pioneered a work in a time, I think politically, when I look back at that time frame that you're talking about and put a pin there and watch the political development in America and some of the culture war stuff that we all grew up in. I grew up in, certainly in that air, and just watched so many people get hurt, so many people abandon faith because of the fallout of some of the things that you're describing. And then to feel called, for me, out of a pastoral vocation to this space that you've been pioneering of faith and art. I find myself picking up your book that was published, before I began this work and became involved in this. And it is a breath of fresh air. And it's such, like, if you're climbing a straight vertical climb and you find something to hold on to, and you find that place where you can tuck a good hand, put a foot in there and get some momentum, you can get some strength and a foundation. That's how it felt every single page I was reading, and I was learning from, I was getting having language for. And so we're just in your debt for pioneering is no easy thing. You're on the West Coast, you're out in pioneer country, but that's a rugged rugged vocation. So thank you. I can't wait to get into beauty will save the world. People hear that and a lot of people laugh at that statement. Some people are put off by that statement. Other people breathe a really mysterious and wonder-filled sigh when you say that. But you are at Slant Books today. So before we get into your book, you're actually publishing and creating a platform to build a way forward for some of the world's greatest writers today. And we share this in common that we don't believe they're all dead. We say that often that the world's greatest artists aren't dead. We don't need to keep looking back. We need to look forward and find some great authors. Tell us just a little bit about Slant Books and your hope for sticking a flag in the ground and, again, kind of doing a new pioneering work.
Well, absolutely. And this really applies to everything that I've done. I grew up certainly revering the tradition. I went to, a conservative liberal arts college, Hillsdale, where I was steeped in the classics. And, but what happened along the route of kind of pursuing that traditional liberal arts education was the sudden light bulb that went off over my head was this tradition is glorious. This Judeo-Christian, rich Western civilization deserves to be defended and nourished and renewed and reformed. Um, and who is extending that tradition? Who is making it? Who is adding to that tradition? And honestly, I can encounter people around me who more or less said, "Well, that tradition is dead. You have to understand that, Greg. This is the modern world. This is, modernity. With like a capital M, as if it was some evil kingdom that we had strayed into, where all was terrible and nothing good could come out of it." And I thought, how is that possible? Has God abandoned us? Is the Holy Spirit trapped in a cage in somebody's basement? Why aren't we finding new Dantes and new Dostoevskys and new Flannery O'Connors? And it was, in fact, the 20th century writers like T.S. Eliot and Flannery O'Connor who really became my examples because I was alerted to them because they were defenders of the Judeo-Christian tradition, and they were Orthodox believers in their respective denominations. But then I had this sudden recognition that you know they were modern artists. They wrote in like weird modern styles, and I that sort of like was the old-fashioned robot with the steam coming out of its ear. This does not compute. Like, how is that possible? And then I realized, it's actually what they were doing in their modern style was using the language of the present moment, something that resonated with the culture around them. Eliot, for example, wrote in fragments, and his poetry is fragmentary. And at first I thought, oh, that's the ruins of our culture. That's the sign of, the end of the world. He's despairing and nihilistic. But I had a teacher who said to me, Greg, a fragment is broken off from a whole, right? And I said, yes. And he said, look at the way Eliot is using these fragments in the poem. And I said, okay. And he said, well, here, let's just take one of them. This phrase, after this, our exile. And I said, see, exile, that's a symbol of alienation. We don't belong in the world. Everything wrong with the modern era. He said, do you know where that fragment comes from? I said, no. He said, well, it comes from a Christian prayer. And do you know what words follow it? And I said, no. He said, here's the full quote. After this, our exile, show us the blessed fruit of thy womb, Jesus. It's a prayer honoring the Virgin Mary. And I just had my mind blown because suddenly I saw you could do something in a modern style that reflected what was going on in your era, a sense of fragmentation, but you could then reflect it back toward the tradition. Like you could tell people, you've forgotten the faith that was behind this quote that you can barely remember. Once that happened, once I realized a new style doesn't necessarily mean bad, it could mean, in fact, it could mean very good, and it speaks to our own time. I thought to myself, I want to find the contemporary artists and writers who are using the styles of our own era to do the same old thing, which is to actually ask about God and beauty and mystery.
With those words that you just ended with, lifted off the page in Beauty Will Save the World, I felt a challenge a bit, an exhortation, because even I was feeling that tension because I would hear voices say it's not worth doing. We did a symphony project. We just commissioned a composer to do a full symphony. We're doing a second symphony, doing a lot in visual artists with visual artists using classical realism. And some of the voices that come is kind of careful. You should not, dare to touch those waters because that canon is closed. You don't need to add anything. We have all the classical music. We have all the visual works. And to invite any new artist to do that would almost be like disrespectful or futile to add to it. And that there's something in me that was just felt that that's not right. That the Holy Spirit's not in a basement in a cage. I love that. He's still operating today. So when I heard you writing and saying there's artists in the modern moment that are right now that are not writing against tradition, but they're drawing from it and giving fresh expression to it. I thought, okay, now we're on to something that is urgent in our time. But it's challenging to go find artists, writers in your case like this is challenging in our modern moment. If you can think like a gold miner where they find the pay dirt, that little trail where the gold is, where are you finding the best writers who embody what you're describing, the best of drawing from the tradition and the freshness of writing with a new style? Is there a place or a region or an academic tradition where you're saying, yeah, there is something bubbling up here with new writers?
Well, I'm sure there are ways to answer that question along those lines, but I think my impulse is to actually kind of push back and say, they're coming from everywhere. They're coming from, all over the place. And I think that's a sign that there's a deep human need to wrestle with the big questions, and to feel a connection to the past and to try to extend that tradition as I was the way I put it. So yeah, I would say, this is not a club. This is not like four people meeting for beers in Portland. This is really, an impulse that I've observed coming from every spectrum of the church, landscape, and culturally, regional. Yeah, each identified source has its own preoccupations, but they still find ways to talk to each other and enrich each other. And actually found, some encouragement that ecumenically speaking, that even different Christian traditions have been speaking to each other in ways that I think are grace filled and build up the body of Christ. So yeah, I really do think that it's so deeply woven into the way God made us to want to both ask the big questions and to make things, to make works of art that embody these questions, that I really do think they're kind of, you know, our Lord said the stones will cry out. Well, again, the human heart will cry out. Even in an era where people are trying to hush it, I think it's just going to. Solzhenitsyn used the idea of the blade of grass that would break through the concrete, of modern ideology and modern, just the hardened heart of the world that we live in. And I really do feel that these questions are gonna come forward.
Yeah. I think when I opened your book, the first thing I noticed is that the citation from Solzhenitsyn's lecture, where he quotes "Beauty will save the world," and that we have quoted that before, shared that idea. That's been inspirational to our team. And some people they don't understand what's being communicated there. I love that that was the front and center. It's on the cover of your book, and that's how I found my way to your book. But how do you answer that when somebody says, "Whoa, whoa, 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 beauty will save the world. Don't go too far."
I completely understand the response, and I would say that the way that the phrase came together was it came from a wonderful, long, difficult, but also deeply rewarding novel by Dostoevsky, and he has a character in the story use these words, "Beauty will save the world," and the author, he knew that they would be controversial. He knew that they would be provocative. It's meant to provoke you. It's meant to make you think, and even maybe to put up your defenses, because yeah, it does go contrary to some deeply ingrained attitudes that we have. What I would say is this: don't take it literally. It's meant to be more like a metaphor, more like a thought provoker, because what it does is it tugs at something that we all feel. That here's how I'd put it. There's a great theologian who once said, "There's the good, the true, and the beautiful." We all have agreed these are the fundamental transcendentals they used to be called, but those are this kind of the trinity of the created order is truth, goodness, and beauty. And they need to live together in a Trinitarian relationship. That is, you need to keep them in balance, because if you emphasize one or two and you demote one or two, things start to go a little bit wrong. So, for example, when truth gets emphasized too much at the expense of goodness and beauty, it starts getting dry, and it just becomes abstract ideas. If goodness um, is stressed without truth or without beauty, it's no longer attractive. We don't see it. We're not struck by holiness. If beauty gets neglected and truth and goodness get emphasized, you get that more rationalistic, legalistic, approach to the world that somehow loses something of the attraction, of the mystery, of the glory of God, and it makes it, just more rote, more following the rules, and not joy, not in a sense ecstasy of receiving God's grace in our lives. So when we say beauty will save the world, it's a way of saying sometimes people argue all the time over truth and goodness. We're always debating, and there's always static on the line there. But the thing about beauty is it can sort of be like a stealth bomber. It can like go underneath the radar of our conscious minds, which are always fighting and being, oh, what's true, what's not true. And beauty can come right in under the radar and pierce our heart, almost like wound us, people have said. That sense when you get pierced by the recognition of something overwhelmingly attractive and amazing and mysterious and yes, beautiful. So, since I think many of us have had that experience, that's what that phrase should trigger. It should trigger that awareness, not literally beauty will save the world, but beauty will save the world in some ways because it frees us from some of those debates and some of those overly ritualistic, rationalistic, legalistic ways of looking at human life. So it's meant to be a corrective, not a sort of sentimental idea in its own right. Yes, goodness and truth always, but in a true balanced Trinitarian relationship. And honestly, in the Western tradition, if one of them have been a little bit more neglected, I would say it is beauty. At least when we start talking theologically, we don't really know what to do with beauty. It scares us a little bit. Like beauty can be seductive, and it's true, it can. But at the same time, if we lose it, we also lose something. We throw the baby out with the bathwater, and that's just something I don't think we should do as Christians, as citizens, as human beings.
No, it's beautifully said. I love that Trinitarian frame too, to imagine beauty, goodness, and truth functioning in a relationship, Trinitarian in a sense. And we've all experience that where the spirit is, we just ignore the Holy Spirit. Like, we don't need to talk about the Spirit. We'll talk about truth, we'll talk about charity, but we'll leave that out. And we're impoverished. There's a lack of aliveness and power in those contexts. And so we orient back. And I think they do hold each other in tension. I'm with you that I think in our moment, if there's one of those that has been underattended to in the Christian tradition, it would be beauty. And I think that I have my thoughts on how we arrived here, but maybe from your work and from your experience, what brought us, maybe kind of got us veering in this direction where beauty has become the underattended thing? Is it just the risk that it's seductive and it can lead you to turn inward? It's self-oriented and subjective, and is it that turn that led us to be so suspicious of it that we moved here? Or is it just a general move toward rationalism that made us dispense with anything that wasn't utility for utility's sake? How do you feel like we arrived here? And do you feel like it's turning? I feel a bit like it's turning. I mean, I do sense what you sense, that the ground cries out and the artists start to emerge, because we can't exist without beauty being a part of it. But from your view, how did we end up here, cemented, needing that grass to sprout up?
Well, yeah, it's this is a debate that's been around for a long time, and Plato kicked the poets out of the Republic, remember? And he thought they were crazy. But on the other hand, Plato thought they were kind of divinely crazy in a way, that the ecstasy of the poet, was like the god descending into the poet. And I think there is some, obviously he's a pagan, but I think he's sensing something about the Holy Spirit, in fact, even from his pagan era. Yeah, I think it is always tempting to see beauty as the unpredictable element, the seductive element, the subjective element. But I would argue that beauty actually takes us out of ourselves. I would say that the minute you encounter beauty, you are encountering something outside of yourself, not yourself. And what that does is it decenters yourself. It takes your own ego, your own fears, your own anxieties, your own worries, you know, and suddenly you're caught up in this other thing. And and that's reality. That's the world outside of you. And it's an avenue of grace that's being offered to you. So I would say that beauty ultimately is the best antidote to egotism, to the kinds of fear that we have. And let's face it, no one would argue. I mean, we all understand that pursuing truth, pursuing goodness, they take work, they take effort. The cultivation of virtue, of prayer, of obedience, of self-discipline, of charity. Well, why shouldn't we devote a little bit of effort towards beauty? Why shouldn't we, learn a little bit? I mean, it's wonderful that people can automatically look at something and render like a work of art and render an opinion instantly. I don't like that, you know, or oh wow, that's amazing. Um, and that's precisely because beauty does just go zoomed right into you. But having said that, I'm delighted that people offer instant opinions. But what if you could get better at it? What if you could develop that sense? What if you could learn to distinguish something that's a little better made and something that's a little bit more, crude and not as well made? What if you actually invested in developing your mind and heart to become more appreciative of that? Then you might agree that it's not utterly subjective, that there are reasons why there are certain pieces that are uh, understood to be masterpieces. I mean, yes, no one agrees 100% on every work of art made in human history, but there are some things that are pretty well recognized out there. Why? Why? What are they? How do they achieve the status that they've achieved? I think sometimes people resist that. They're because they're nervous. It can be intimidating to learn something new. I mean, but so is holiness is intimidating, and we can shy away from it.
Mm,
So I think all the transcendentals can be approached, in fear, but also they can be approached in hope and humility, so that we develop the inner capacities that God wants us to develop, that He made us to develop, that He wants us to grow and to become what He made us able to be. And I think it would be nice if there was a little less instant response in terms of the arts, a little more humility, and more a little bit like, oh, tell me more.
mm,
what Why do you see something in this? And conversations can build around that, and I think those are helpful.
mm. What a brilliant thought on formation and spiritual formation, and just the reality that if we have underattended to nurturing, like we're great, especially in the Protestant tradition, we're going to teach, 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 right? And so we're focused on truth, good, and we've built that muscle. Charity is at the forefront, and participating in the good, especially in the young generation, just orienting naturally to wanting justice. And I think that's a good. Thinking about that though, if we have no voice, if we're not educating and training and shaping, then we leave this void, and then people are suspicious, and they go, well, I don't know if I want to. I took an art class at university, and the ideas were being transmitted were bananas. They were bizarre, and I couldn't, they weren't incoherent with reality and against my theological convictions. Maybe that's because haven't spoken into that space. And I think I love what you're saying, that it does require training. There's really rigorous, good discussion to have around beauty and formation, and to think well about what is beautiful, and how do we make sense of beauty? Why does something move us? Why does something else repel us? Those are great conversations to have. And I think you make a great point that if in our discipleship, we're not training people towards beauty and good and truth, then we have missed some part of being fully human.
Well, when we talk about truth, goodness, and beauty, we're really only talking about half of the equation, because what are the human capacities that respond, that correlate to truth, goodness, and beauty? Well, two of them are obvious. God's given us reason. He's given us a mind. He's given us the ability to, you know, to reason our way through much of reality. Of course, revelation is required to complete that knowledge, but so we have reason, we have faith. We all, I think, have an intuitive sense that reason and faith and reason, those are two, respectable citizens. And we've always, in the Western tradition, loved those. But then what is, and faith corresponds to goodness, of course. But then what corresponds to beauty? I would argue imagination is the missing element. That we develop our faith, yes, we develop our reason, yes, but we also need imagination. And I think you cannot read the Gospels. Well, you cannot read the Bible at all without realizing A, that a third of it was written in poetry, so beautiful, literary, crafted language. And you can't, listen to Jesus tell parables, tell stories that are full of paradoxes and confusing things that seem upside down and inside out and wrong, unless you understand that, God wants us to understand that there's the letter of the law, but also there's the spirit of the law. And if we're too literalistic, we're actually going towards falsehood. We're actually getting it wrong. If you don't see something, both letter and spirit living together, you become, you go down the wrong path. And so for me, imagination, Jesus is always, think bigger, think bigger, think, don't be so petty, don't be so fearful. God is love. God is, this world is for you. Why, reach out, have faith, walk on the water, believe that you can do the impossible. These are things that require imagination, a leap of imagination. We often say, why? This we say a leap of faith, because the rational step by step won't get us there. We need something else. We need that extra freedom to fly. And I think God says, fly, come to me, walk on that water. And it takes imagination to do that.
I'm Zach Elliott, Executive Director of VUVIVO, and together with our partners, we are recovering the deep Christian tradition of standing behind the arts by making significant investment in visual art, music, and literature. We're working together with some of the world's most gifted fine artists, composers, and authors to wondrously reveal Christianity and invite people to know God personally. This work to recover the tradition of standing behind the arts is going to take a fresh generation of patrons committed to resourcing and releasing these great artists to use the highest and best of their gifts to the glory of God and for the good of the world. You can join us in that work by becoming a V3 partner. Reach out for more information or go to vuvivo.com/support to join us in standing behind the arts. Mm. Yeah, I think I just hear that aching and groaning of when you opened and said, I've got good news and bad news in some ways, right? Like the good news, a lot has been done. Some bad news is that we still find ourselves in the tension. And even as you talk, I think imagining a day where, especially in the Christian tradition, there isn't tension between these three, but there's like a just a bold affirmation to say truth. Yes, we're not backing away from it. Please, we need the best of our truth to come forward. And goodness, yes, it should flood and fill the earth. And beauty, we should be the most powerful advocates and patrons of the beautiful to fill the earth. A day like that can come. I think it is coming, but we've got work to do. We've pointed to that mountain, but we've got room to travel. And I think you're doing you have been a pioneer in this work for a long time. So you have already contributed so much. Today, you're focusing your work finding writers and the best great writers that are living today. If you could say the thing that makes writing essential, I'm thinking about the author who is listening to this, or the young writer who's listening to this and they're inspired, they believe their work matters, that they are contributing something that's worth it and worth the sacrifice. What advice do you have? What makes writing great, right? As a publisher, as an editor, as an author, as somebody who cares about the craft, what do you say makes great writing that shouldn't be lost, that shouldn't be overlooked, that we shouldn't overly teach, or say that's just a thing that you look for when you find a manuscript that comes to you?
Well, I think you put your finger on it when you spoke about craft. It is a craft. It is, and it is a discipline, and it requires its own kind of formation. I would say, in some ways, the formation of an artist parallels the formation of the heart, the soul, in a spiritual way. That is, you're learning many forms of humility, many forms of practice of things that have to be done over and over again. You know, a great reverence for the tradition, learning from those who come before and their struggles and what they've made, and starting off by imitating, the way that you so often do when it comes to you know writing, or any kind of art form. Um, and before you get to fly with your own wings, I mean, I really do think that there's a spirituality to the mastery of art forms. I think for people of faith, the danger is, that we might be tempted to think that, well, we've been given the grace to know God's truth. That gives me a head start. And I think, I don't think that's true. I think that, when it comes to these God-given skills and gifts that we're given, person of faith, I mean, Flannery O'Connor once said something like, you know, I'm a novelist, and a Christian, but I have to be a novelist, first and foremost as a writer, because my faith doesn't provide a shortcut. It doesn't. It should encourage me to take on that sometimes scary, sometimes very arduous path of discipline. So I look for craft. I look for writers that know how to make beautiful things. and hopefully in some way surprise me by twisting and tweaking and shifting a little bit. That's how Western art has always been. You know, it's traditional, but it's always looking for something new. I mean, Jesus says, I make all things new. And I think in the arts, we do, not with the kind of cheap cult of originality. We all know that that can be obviously abused. And it's easy to kind of laugh at, artists who's, put out total garbage, in the name of the new. But still, even the best art, even Michelangelo was slightly different than Raphael and slightly different than Leonardo. And each and every age, we're looking for you know, our personal, the flavor, the kind of individuality that God's given us, the uniqueness goes into our art. And so, yeah, I look for a craft. I look for awareness of tradition. I look also for some freshness, for some personal dimension of looking at the world that is unique and precious.
Yeah. Would make a great name for a new publishing house if you could have Slant Books and just tell it a little bit new, a little bit fresh, a little bit slant, take a different take to it. That's a great idea. I think you've done a great job in even just naming your publishing house to say, I want to, I believe there's great writers still there today, the greatest stories, right? There's nothing new under the sun, but we can tell them again. We can look at it again. We can take these things in a new way. And that's the constant invitation to artists, which is so, it lights artists up because they love that invitation. When you say, "Hey, paint a pear," but show me what you see in a pear and make it new, make it fresh. Artists love this. I want to give you a chance or maybe invite you to, there's so many people listening to this conversation. They go, yes, thank you. We're learning, we're growing. We appreciate this perspective to not divorce beauty and goodness and truth, to see them in that Trinitarian sense. That's gold. To recover a way of deepening our appreciation for beauty as something that's worth investing in and learning about. That's gold. To think that there are great artists out today and we can encourage them, that's wonderful. But there's probably people listening and going, but I'm not an artist. I'm not going to publish books. I'm not going to write books. You have a really great way of pulling back from that separation where there's artists and then there's the rest of us. And thinking about beauty as something that all of us are contributing to, and not just enjoying, but contributing to. What do you say to the person who says, I understand that beauty matters, right? Objectively, but I don't know how it matters to my day to day, and how to maybe take that step to say, I'm not a working artist. How can I participate in the beautiful in my day to day life? How can I live maybe with a bit more of an orientation to lead with beauty if I'm not a working artist? What would you say to that person who says, does art just belong to a certain class of people and then the rest of us get to pay for it or enjoy it or admire it? What would you say to that person who's wondering about that?
Well, I understand that, you know, anyone who is new to a thing or not steeped in it can, that those first steps can be trepidatious. They can be scary. They can even be forbidding. And yet I think that there are very few people who don't have some element of art and beauty in their lives, whether it's the music they listen to or even a poster on the wall, or choosing one car because of the shape of that car over another car. I always think there's a residual element somewhere, and I think you want to build on that. And I do think there are ways to savor the the knowledge and the pleasure, and I think this is another one of the problems with beauty is people get scandalized by the fact that pleasure's involved. uh, but God gives us that. That's the gift, right? He wants us to be attracted by something that gives us joy, that gives us pleasure. And so I would say, look, I mean, I barely got past geometry in high school, and I got a C minus in chemistry. Um, Math and science scare the crap out of me, but I love astronomy. I love looking at the stars. I love learning about black holes and binary systems. If you ask me to explain the physics of it, I couldn't even start. I mean, I would, two plus two is about, where it gets weird for me. But I love savoring all that stuff. You don't have to be an expert to feel the joy, to feel this mystery, this God-given amazingness of the created universe. And I would say, you don't have to be an academic. You don't have to be a scholar. That's the great thing about beauty, precisely, right? You don't need a degree. You can just bask in it and let it penetrate you, and you're going to take something away from it. I know that I would, I know astrophysicists would laugh at how little I understand about astronomy. I don't care. I don't give a hoot because I love it. And I'll listen to people talking about the physics because if I can get a drop of the pleasure out of this amazing universe of stars and galaxies and black holes, then I'm a happy camper. So I would just say there are ways to begin on this journey without worrying about degrees or how much you've invested. Just give yourself permission to start.
Oh, that's so good. It triggers in my mind one of my favorite poems called "One Day I'll Visit Hawk Mountain." If you haven't read it, "One Day I'll Visit Hawk Mountain." This woman opens this poem describing like everything it requires to be a good birder. You have to know this, you have to know this, all the data that's required to be a good birder, to be a good astrophysicist. And right in the middle of the poem, she says, "But I am a bad birder." And she says, "Because I care little about." And then she goes and says all the things. And she just talks about how she wants to be caught up in the wonder of watching these hawks soar. And what's beautiful there is she's not throwing away all the things she does know. She starts saying, I know these things, but that's not the aim. The aim is to still be moved when you look into the heavens, or when Artemis 2 sends something back. Does it still move you? Do you enjoy it, right? Just knowing how it works for the sake of knowing how it works. There's something more. And I love that, the scandalizing of pleasure. Just, we don't need to be afraid of it. God does want us to enjoy things. Strawberries should delight us. That's not, and that's such a great reminder. So thank you. And it's fun to have somebody who says 2 plus 2 is a reach, who's also brilliant. So thanks for saying it like that. Cause you have spent your lifetime, not just in the academic world, but pioneering and building platforms to elevate other great thinkers. And so that winsomeness to say, hey, come on, and this is a space that you belong into, is really, really generous. So I love this book. This was such a gift. Beauty Will Save the World: Recovering the Human in an Ideological Age. Uh, I love work like this that stands the test of time. This was published a few years ago, and yet it was fresh for me today. And as I read it, I was reading it with that lens to say, hey, did this endure? I wonder if there's things that would be done different or written different today. And I thought, no, you did a fair job of pointing into the future and giving voice to the current moment. And you've left us something that's evergreen. And so we appreciate that. I want to just maybe close. I want to respect your time, but just ask you. You end the book with some authors that have been important to you, that you think they've left a mark on you. They've been uh, great contributions. And I'm just thinking about somebody who goes, okay, I'm inspired and I want to pick up some books. I want to read well. And this is a wonderful chance for me to ask from you in your chair, if I was going to pick 5 books that are great books that, we've quoted, some of these big heavyweight writers, but if you were to say there's 5 books that are going to welcome you into a wider world and really enrich your life, the reason side, the faith side, the imagination side, if I could only put 5 books in a box and send those to you, and then you had to carry those on your journey forward, what would Gregory's 5 books be? If you could just, and we won't hold you to it, right? Like this is going to change. And I'm kind of thinking as a dad sending kids to college, but what are the 5 books that you would say, man, if I could put these in a box, reason, imagination, and faith would be better for it?
Oh, you're killing me, man. I mean, that's just, that's such a difficult task. I mean, I could, because how do you slice the pie? I mean, the classicist part of me, the great book side of me wants to start with Dante and Augustine, and going forward, the Augustine's Confessions and Dante's Divine Comedy. But are you asking more about, the current world? That's been my vocation, right? Has been contemporary writers. So I could pick somebody like Marilyn Robinson with her novel Gilead, for example, that I think is an incredibly beautiful portrait. It's one of the few books in American literature that's already recognized as a classic and about a pastor. I
Mm,
mean, the whole book centers around a pastor of a church, and you know it's evidence that, and this man is a holy man. He's a flawed man. He's still a sinner,
mm,
but he's also holy, and there's a beauty to his holiness. And so Gilead, is the story that really unveils a kind of what the Bible calls the beauty of holiness
mm,
in a way, which I think, we often talk about how it's easier to portray evil in art than it is goodness. Like some people think goodness is boring, but I think a novel like Gilead, very much contradicts that. Oh gosh, I mean, there are so many others. I think a lot of people in the Christian community have appreciated the poetry of the late Lucy Shaw. You could pick almost any one of her poetry collections. She's someone of deep Christian faith, but also great imagination, great spunkiness, feistiness of the way she looks at the world. Um, and again, Flannery O'Connor, she's shocking. She can in a sense turn you off because there's violence in her work, and sometimes a kind of what she called the grotesque. But I think what she does at her best in these great stories is to not to portray violence as something that God like throws thunderbolts down at human beings, but she tells these stories of human beings who were subject to pride, and they think they can recreate reality, but when they bump into reality, that's when the violence happens. It happens when human beings, out of pride, crash into the world that God has made. And actually, it's those moments of violence in Flannery O'Connor's writing that when you get knocked on your butt and the Tweety birds are going around over your head and you're looking up into the heavens. It's at that moment when your pride is humbled that grace is offered to you in her short stories. And I think that's one reason why she's one of the great Christian writers of the 20th century. So sorry, these are like literally all over the map, but you asked an impossible question.
I love it. That was an impossible question. That was totally unfair. I was trying to think, should I ask 1 or 5? And I think you did well. Dante, right? Like grab Dante, grab Confessions, pick up Gilead, and then you've got some poetry from Shaw and rounding it out and bringing it home with Flannery O'Connor and just pick one of her works. So I thank you for that. That was a generous response to an impossible question. But Gregory, awesome. We're cheering for you in Slant Books, the idea that there's great writers out there today, and we hope you find them. I hope to invite them on to here to celebrate new work and to lift them up and get them out into the world. But thank you for your pioneering work. Thank you for Beauty Will Save the World and your contribution to thinking about that idea, and for the generosity to help us unpack it and understand it. I've learned a ton from you, and just know that your work is upstream of a lot of us who are following in your wake and trying to bring what we have to contribute. So we're grateful.
Oh, you're very kind. It's an honor and a pleasure to talk with you and to learn about your own work and how you're carrying it on into the world in your community. So bless you for all that you do.
Thank you.